Hey everyone, how are you doing? I know it's been a while, hasn't it? My life's taken a bit of a busier turn than I'd expected, and it's been a little difficult to find time to prepare a topic and sit down to film it. I saw there were some very sweet comments asking if everything was okay, and just want to say absolutely no worries about me. I'm doing very well. I'm just super busy. So there will be new videos. I just can't promise how often we get around to filming. But don't worry, I still have so many topics I want to look up and share with you. So many maps from the post box that you kindly sent me. So, it might take a little bit of time, but I'm not going anywhere. And speaking of maps from the post box, you might remember, I think it was just at the end of last year when I asked on the community tab whether anyone had sent me something from the US, because there was a note from the post office that a package had been held back in customs and they needed more info on it. And I got a lot of warnings from you that it might be some kind of scam, but turns out it was real. It was a package from Corrie, who really kindly sent the package a second time with even more maps, and she included this cute little paper leaf. I will link her Instagram page because she makes these absolutely gorgeous paper plants that you can use to decorate your house. I'm just really so impressed with her craft, so you can go and check it out if you want. And I got 2 lovely notes from her. You can see here one's from November and then one from April. She added some lovely little place cards for my next dinner party. Thank you. And a postcard of a unicorn in a garden. This is a tapestry from France or the Netherlands, from around 1500, from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it came at just the right point. I got the package just after I got back from Paris in spring, where I also saw some tapestries with unicorns in the Musée de Cluny. And I was just absolutely stunned by them. So gorgeous. I really like these. But we're not talking about unicorn tapestries today. I think you already have an idea what today's topic is. We're going to have a look at Washington, the nation's capital. And you're probably already familiar with this kind of design. We've seen it a couple of times. It's from the National Park Service. And at least to me, they seem a bit funny at first, because Washington is a city. So I didn't immediately understand why this was in the the hands of the park service. But we're going to have a closer look at this and see what the map says. Basically, the main part we're going to have a look at is the National Mall right here. But let's take it slow. So let's open this up and see what it says. Let's make some space here. So we have a timeline up here that tells us about Washington, D.C., how the capital was built, how it was planned, all the different events throughout its history. And it starts off right here with a brief explanation. The Washington that you see today had its birth over 2 centuries ago in a rational yet visionary design, unprecedented in its scale. The style of urban planning then current in Europe and the neoclassical design of the grounds for the Palace of Versailles influenced Pierre-Charles L'Enfant's plan for the city and its core mall area, brilliantly adapting those ideas to Washington's terrain. L'Enfant placed the capital on Jenkins Hill and the President's house on a lower terrace that overlooked the Potomac River. Between them ran Pennsylvania Avenue to symbolize the separate but connected branches of government, and the spirit of that plan lives in the city still. So we're not being modest here about anything. It's brilliantly adapted. It's a radical yet visionary design, unprecedented in its scale. So we have a couple of important points already in this little paragraph. For one, we have Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, who was a French artist and engineer. And he took a couple of different plans from Europe, from different cities. So not just the Palace of Versailles, but actual city plans. Brought them to the US and based on those plans, presented his own plan for the capital. Then these were adapted to Washington's terrain along the Potomac River, right here, going down into Chesapeake Bay. The area was specifically chosen here along the river, and it says here that it was supposed to be a 10-mile square encompassing parts of Maryland and Virginia. And then the core of the plan is the triangle created by Capitol, White House and Mall. So the Capitol on Jenkins Hill, at the time called Congress House. The White House wasn't white yet, it was called the President's House. Then you have this mall in between. If we look at this plan, so we have the river. This open area here is this mall. We have the Capitol here, the President's House, that it is written. And this at the time was mostly Victorian gardens. At the time, not yet, but it was going to be Victorian gardens. And then changed significantly around 1900. The fact that Washington DC is a planned city is also really evident when you look at the streets. When a city grows naturally, you usually have kind of all these little streets, lots of curves, sort of people adapting to the terrain, to their needs, to the space that they have, where it can get a bit difficult to open up spaces, like we saw in Amsterdam when we looked at that city. And it shows in the city grid. While here you have streets running north to south, and these are numbered. You have streets running east to west, or I guess east to west in that direction. These have letters. And then diagonally you have avenues, which at the time were decided to be named after states of the Union. So here we have North Carolina, South Carolina, I think this is Georgia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and then there's Vermont. I'm not seeing a name here. It's Maryland, Delaware, Virginia. Right. And then where these avenues intersect with the streets, you have either circular places or squares. And the plan was to name these after notable Americans. It was a very influential plan, so the little text isn't exaggerating here. And of course, at the time, there was just a popular thing, a popular idea to plan out an entire city, to also make it controllable that way, which is something that you see in Paris, for example, with these big avenues opening up through the city. Let's have a quick look at where Washington DC is actually located. I have a teeny tiny atlas here. Where we have the Eastern USA, and we find Washington right here. You kind of really need glasses for this one. There's Potomac here, the river. There's Chesapeake Bay. And Washington DC itself is a relatively small area. There's about 700,000 people living in the city, but then the metropolitan area is quite a bit larger, where you have about 6 million people. And the thing is, you can kind of nicely see this on this map, that there's this connection north to Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, all the way up to Boston. And This area altogether is called megalopolis. It's a term that was introduced in the 60s by a French geographer, Jean Gottman, and he used it to describe this specific phenomenon where you have different cities all independent from one another, but they are nonetheless closely connected through their infrastructure, and they form kind of this common area. The term megalopolis, by the way, has I think quite funny origin. It was taken from an ancient Greek city that chose this name because it wanted to become the biggest of all cities, and so they figured, let's show it in the name. I don't know if they were successful. I'd never heard of megalopolis before, so I guess maybe not. But you have to dream big, right? So, definitely an influential area. You have about 17% of the US population living just here alone, and Washington, of course, being the center of the US, not just in a symbolic manner, but also because we already said you have the capital here, so the legislative branch of the government, you have the White House, the executive branch, and the Supreme Court is located there too, so that's the judicial branch, meaning all three branches of the government are placed here in Washington. The somewhat odd thing about Washington DC is that it's not a state and also doesn't belong to a state. And it's kind of nicely illustrated in this teeny tiny pocket atlas of the world that Fred sent me a while ago from the US. I always find it fascinating when you find a map, when you find an atlas from another place in the world, because, you know, the ones that I have usually start with Austria, and then like a quarter of the atlas is just Austria, but this starts with the US. And has this really nice introduction on the different states with a map. We have Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts. But if we move forward, this runs from 1918, by the way. We get here to the District of Columbia, and you see that it is listed, but it's not its own state, and we don't get a map in here, sadly. It tells us that it's named in honor of Christopher Columbus, District of Columbia. Columbia was quite a common term, I think less so today. But of course you have different states named after it. You also had a personification, so a female figure called Columbia that would represent either the Americas or later the US. And so that the district is named after this kind of representation of the states isn't a coincidence. Columbia was later replaced by pictures of Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, and of course this kind of female allegory for state or region has kind of fallen out of fashion, so you don't find it very often anymore. But it used to be popular, for example, with Britannia, or France being represented by Marianne. That one still exists, that one's still quite common if you ever go to France. But if you go to a museum, you might also find paintings that depict just different regions in Europe, each with a different figure. So let's see what it says. Historical, it's the federal district and seat of national capital of United States. In 1788 to 89, Maryland and Virginia ceded 100 square miles for the seat of the National Congress. The territory south of the Potomac was retroceded to Virginia in 1846. Washington was laid out in 1791 and became the seat of government in 1800, incorporated in 1802. Before that, the capital was basically moving around. So Congress wasn't in one place, but in different places over certain periods. For example, in New York, in Philadelphia. Territorial government with elective institutions existed 1871 to 74. Government by commissioners under Congress substituted 1878. The 3 commissioners are appointed by the president. So there's something really special about Washington, D.C. Because it's not part of a state. People actually couldn't vote. By now, Washington, D.C. has a mayor. They have their own government. And citizens of Washington, D.C. can vote for the president, but they don't have any representation in Congress, and Congress can overrule local laws. So it's a really odd situation in a way that historically made sense. The idea was that the capital should be independent from each state. They shouldn't have to rely on a state for their security. But of course, times have changed quite significantly. And it does pose some questions over why the citizens of the capital are disenfranchised on a national level. I really love some of the phrases in here. The climate is generally healthful throughout the district. The summers are extremely warm, the winters in general mild. The population at the time was rather small. 1800 you had 14,000 people, and by the end of the century about 300,000, and you could see it was growing quite quickly. In 10 years from 280,000 to 330,000, so plus of over 50,000 people in just 10 years. The city contains many handsome buildings. Among the most notable are various government buildings, including National Museum and the Smithsonian Institute. Then it tells us a little bit about schools and universities and the legal rate of interest. But I feel like that's really specific and I'm not sure I quite understand the context here, like judgments, specialties, 12 years, contract debts, 3 years. The pocket atlas of the world. Alright, so we have quite a lot of information already now. Let's see what else we can find here. In 1800, the Senate chamber of the capital is completed. Congress moves from Philadelphia, and the President John Adams and Abigail Adams move into the unfinished White House. Then work continues. In 1814, the capital was burned down by the British and started rebuilding it. In 1836, there was a winning design for a monument to George Washington. A great obelisk was called for. Then you have the Treasury building, which was begun in the same year. 1846, 31 square mile land section ceded by Virginia for the capital city's formation. So there were also some changes in the land. 1848, the Washington Monument was started. However, that's one of the problems when you lay out a map of the city. There were some sandy soils, and so the place where Lafont wanted the monument couldn't actually be used for it because it couldn't support the weight of it. So they had to move it a bit. In 1851, we have a landscape architect who submits a plan for the national park on the mall. He called for a series of natural gardens. So that's this part here. I mentioned earlier that those were mostly Victorian gardens before the museums were built. And this initial plan kind of got lost a bit over time. For example, here in 1872, the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad built a station on the mall, which of course had never been intended. Today, the National Gallery of Art stands at the side of the station, which was demolished in 1907. I think the next part that's important here is 1902. We have a Macmillan Commission, which proposes a reflecting pool west of the Washington Monument, memorial to Lincoln, major memorial south of the Washington Monument, a bridge, etc. And the goal was to restore the open geometric quality Lafont planned for the mall. So you have an addition to the original Lafont plan, which is called the Macmillan plan. And that's when a large part of the mall then was changed. And here, this gives us an answer to the initial question. The National Park Service takes control of the city's national memorials and public parklands. So there's a bit of an overview here. We have the White House set within a national park, the Vietnam Women's Memorial, Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial, one for the US Marine Corps, and so on. So basically, Washington not just has the branches of the government, but it also brings together noteworthy moments in the history of the US. So in order to build a nation, basically, in order to build a common identity, these moments are picked out and considered important. Let's see what we have here specifically. So we have the Potomac River, which forms the border to Virginia. And down here, for example, we have the Pentagon, which is already outside of Washington. We have a tidal basin and the Washington Channel, with a large park here. And this is where we find the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. Basically memorials all around. The Franklin Roosevelt one, the Martin Luther King one. Over here we have the Japanese cherry trees. The White House is up here with the President's Park and Lafayette Park. There's the Eisenhower Executive Office building and the Department of the Treasury. On the side we have the Department of Commerce. Next to Lafayette Park, Department of Veteran Affairs. We have the U.S. Institute of Peace, the American Pharmaceutical Institute, the National Academy of Science and Engineering, the Federal Reserve Board, the Department of the Interior South, the Organization of American States Annex, and so on. That's all along Constitution Avenue. And there's the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, across from the Department of Justice. Then we get to the National Archives, the American Art Museum with the National Portrait Gallery, Federal Trade Commission, Department of Labor, and up here we have Union Station, so trains terminate a little further out and not directly on the mall. From the Lincoln Memorial with the I Have a Dream inscription, we get to this reflecting pool that we just read about. To the Washington Monument. And then here the mall has all kinds of museums. We have the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a more recent one. We have the National Museum of American History and of Natural History. Then we have an East and the West building for the National Gallery of Art. And if we jump to the southern side, we have a Free Gallery of Art, the Sackler Gallery, the African Art Museum, Arts and Industries. Right here is the Smithsonian Castle, the Hirshhorn Museum with a sculpture garden in front of it, the National Air and Space Museum, National Museum of the American Indian, and then again we get to gardens, another memorial, another reflecting pool, and first the Capitol, and then behind it, so we also see where that's placed, the U.S. Supreme Court, right here. I forgot to write down how long the National Mall is, but it takes quite a while to walk from one side to the other. And then of course there is so much to see. I can't even imagine how many days I think basically you would need if you wanted to visit every one of these museums. And the Smithsonian, of course, alone is a really fascinating institution with many, many different museums and research institutions. And well, we haven't looked at the southern side here, where again more museums like the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. We have more departments like the Department of Energy, the Federal Aviation Administration, Department of Education. And we have, maybe quite interestingly right here, L'Enfant Plaza, where you can see an inlay of the original plan of L'Enfant. If this is not big enough and you want to take a closer look, I think that's a really neat idea. And we can see quite nicely again, we have the north-south streets being numbered, east to west having letters, and then the boulevards cutting through. Well, there's a bit of an order on the Southwest Freeway, but here, for example, Virginia Avenue, Washington Avenue, and so on. As a last point, they also indicate how long it takes to walk. So this inner circle here would be a 15 to 20 minute walk. And the outer circle is a 20 to 30 minute walk from the Washington Monument, which is here. So this is about 30 minutes, another 30 minutes. So it would take you about an hour to walk from one side of the National Mall to the other. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, that would be a good workout. Here we can see the Capitol. We get a bit of a view of how it looks inside with the Capitol dome here. We can see how it was built. I feel like it's almost unrecognizable without this massive dome at the center. We have the National Gallery of Art, a little visitor map. We can see where to find it. One thing I really love, visitor policies, starts off, "We're glad you're here." I think that's really lovely. You can see here the West Building and the East Building. Not quite so easy with the floors. We have the concourse, the ground level, the mezzanine, the upper level and the tower level. And what they're showing are mostly paintings and sculptures. I think pretty much all European here, Italian, French, Spanish, Dutch and Flemish. Here the dark orange part is American paintings and sculptures in this area. We also have American decorative art and paintings right here. Because this one has a tower level, one interesting thing about Washington DC is also that it doesn't have skyscrapers. There's a ruling that cities shouldn't be higher than the width of the street that they're on plus 6 meters. And that's, of course, quite limiting. So again, some more information also on how to watch Congress in session, which I think is always a really interesting thing to do. We have some more info on the Statue of Freedom and on different statues that you find in the Capitol Visitor Center. So lots and lots of different people from the US. And a little bit on the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So I think Corrie was busy if she visited all of those places. Thank you so much, Corrie, for your lovely gifts, and thank you for lending me your time and spending maybe an evening or maybe the time of your midday siesta with me. I hope you feel nice and relaxed and ideally quite sleepy. I will see you again soon. Promise. Alright. Good night.